Good day, everyone. Welcome to another week of Greek study. This is week 3, I believe. I can't believe that it's already our third week, and I hope everyone is doing well and that you're having a good quarter and that you're looking forward to the beginning of another week. Let's get into the video lecture. This is now chapter 4. We are going to add another piece of the language to your arsenal or your bag of tricks, however you want to think about it. This will allow you to start making actual sentences. And so as you'll see when we do the translation exercises, now they're looking like actual sentences and not just sort of random combinations of Greek verb forms. Okay, if you didn't find that super compelling to just translate 3 Greek verbs at a time, and making very simple subject-verb sentences, I don't blame you. And so now we're going to actually start introducing, some elements to the sentences. And while they won't be especially compelling or interesting sentences, they are still, a bit more advanced than what you were doing before. And they're going to start, I guess, resembling actual sentences in the ways that people communicate. So this is a good thing. And yeah, we're introducing now the nouns, going from verbs to nouns. And this is chapter 4 is the nouns of the second declension. And let's get right into it then, because I'm sure that you have a question of what this means, declension. That's not a word that we typically run into in sort of everyday conversation on social media. I'm sure you really haven't used this word in, like talking with people in the cafeteria or something. So declension simply refers to this pattern of form changes, particularly in nouns or pronouns. Adjectives also take declension patterns, but they kind of follow the nouns. And so really this is a noun thing that indicates how a word is to be used or understood in a sentence. All right, what that means is a certain word the subject of the verb? Is it the object of the verb? Okay, is it the thing or person who is doing the action? Or is it the thing or person that is kind of receiving the action or the effects of the action? Is this an indirect object, which is then receiving the direct object? Okay, and how do we know, what these words mean? It's one thing to say, okay, well, this vocabulary word, it means book. Okay, but if I say something like, I am reading the book, it's important to know whether the book is doing the reading or whether the book is a thing being read, right? You don't want to make a mistake with that. You don't want to confuse those. And so one way to do this is by using and knowing declension patterns. Something about Greek that is difficult is it is very different from English. For the most part, English does not have declension. Okay, English, we don't change the form of a word to indicate what role it is playing in the sentence. I've given you a couple of examples here in the middle of the slide. Okay, take the word rock, for instance. The word rock can be a subject, right, as in the sentence, the rock is large. Or it can be an object, I throw the rock. Okay, notice the rock, there's no change in the form. Okay, whether it's a subject or the object, it's still the same form. There's no change. You would not be able to tell whether that is the subject or the object just from looking at the word. In English, the position of the word in the sentence is what tells you what role this word is playing in the sentence. And you know for a fact that the rock is the subject in the first sentence. Okay, the rock is large because it comes right before the verb. All right, the verb is, the rock comes before that, and so therefore the rock is the subject of is. Okay, in the second second sentence, I threw the rock follows the verb. And so therefore you know that's the object. It's the thing that is being thrown or the thing that receives the throwing. In English, it's always pretty much subject, verb, object. Okay, sometimes we do switch these around. If you ask a question, there are certain rules and exceptions to that rule of subject, verb, object. Um, you know, it, to ask a question, if I say, I am I am a man, okay? And if you ask a question, am I a man? Okay, you switch those the subject verb, but that's that's in a question. In English, a normal standard indicative mood sentence that is stating a fact or something is subject, verb, object, and you cannot switch those. Otherwise, it means something completely different. Okay, if you say the boy threw the rock or the rock threw the boy, um, yeah, totally different meanings, right? And because you've switched the word order, and therefore you switch what the subject and the object are. The one English exception to this idea that English does not have declension changes, okay, is the first person pronoun, right? If you think of the first person singular pronoun, okay, I is always a subject form. I am going to the store. I bought a new red suit. Okay, anything okay, is always going to be the subject. Me is the object form, and there you do have a form change. Okay, it still has to follow that subject verb object rule, but you instantly know whether this is a subject or an object because it's either I in the subject or me as the object. And you can't switch these around. Okay? They do mean separate things. You don't say me go to school unless you're Cookie Monster, or give the ball to I. Okay, because I is the object of to, and so therefore it can't be I. It has to be me. Give the ball to me. So that's an example in English of what this declension means. Okay, you change the form according to how it is being used in the sentence and what it means. And Greek does this all over the place, and English does not. So that's kind of hard. Now, the other thing that is going to be introduced in this chapter that you probably have not thought about at all, even though it is there, and it's kind of behind the scenes, is case. Case in Greek nouns means, what role is this playing, and how do you know that? What is the form of this, and how do you know what role it's playing in a sentence? I've put here that in Greek, word order is very flexible with regard to meaning. It's totally different than English, okay? English, there's no real change in form, but word order means everything to determine subject, verb, object. In Greek, there are a whole bunch of different forms, but word order doesn't mean a whole lot. And you can switch the word order around, and it still conveys the meaning because of the form that the word is changing into. So yeah, in Greek, the meaning, whether it's a subject, object, indirect object, okay, what's it doing, is determined by this very specific pattern, predictable change in form. And these forms are referred to as cases. Now, there are 5 Greek cases, although some textbooks will argue that there are 8. There are 2 kind of separate roles that the genitive case plays, and 3 roles that the dative case plays. Okay, but they're all the same form, and so this textbook is going off of the idea that there are only 5 cases, and they're just, in some of these, there are different shades of meaning to them. But the basic meaning of each of these 5 cases is as follows. Okay, what we call the nominative case, if a word is taking a form that indicates that it is in the nominative case, and we'll go over how you know that, okay, but if you look at a word and you determine this word is in the nominative case, that word is normally going to be the subject of the sentence. I say normally because there are a few exceptions, and we'll actually cover one of them towards the end of this lesson. All right, but normally, yes, if a word is nominative, it will usually be the subject of the sentence. Okay, for example, the sun is shining. In Greek, there would be a way to indicate that the sun is in the nominative case. The next case name is the genitive case, and normally this case indicates possession. All right, you translate kind of a word of, or you can also translate an apostrophe s here. I actually recommend that for all genitive cases in this first year, you try and translate of. Okay, just translate that word. It's not going to be anywhere in Greek, but when you identify that a word is in the nominative case, you can translate of before that word. For example, the rays of the sun make life possible. All right, this is a genitive case, and therefore the sun would be in the genitive. All right, and you're indicating who or what is doing the possessing or the owning of the kind of head noun that's associated with this genitive. Okay, the genitive is always going to be associated with another noun, pronoun, or something like that. Okay, possession. Next one, dative case. The dative case, if you find a word and it's in the dative, you decide that it's in the dative, it represents the indirect object. Okay, the indirect object is related to the direct object, which is coming up next. But yeah, maybe I'll talk about it then. It's going to be hard to talk about it without talking about the direct object. But in English, we normally translate an indirect object with the word to, and so if you find a dative word, just supply the word to, even though it's not anywhere there in the Greek. You can just always put that there in front of it because it's part of the dative case. All right, we sent a probe to the sun is an example of an indirect object. Okay, the next one, the accusative case. This is the fourth one. This is the last major one. You will normally just be responsible for memorizing the nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative forms of a word. The accusative represents what we call the direct object. The direct object is the thing or person that receives the action of the verb. In the example sentence there, ancient people worship the sun. Ancient people is the subject. They are the ones who are doing the worshiping. But what is receiving the worship? What is receiving the action of the verb? That is what we call the direct object, and in this case, it's the sun. All right. Ancient people are doing the thing. What are they doing? They're worshiping, and what is it that they are worshiping? What receives that worship? The sun. Now, I said I'd talk about the indirect object. The indirect object in a sentence receives the direct object. The direct object, once again, receives the action of the verb. Then the indirect object receives the direct object. We sent a probe to the sun. We are the ones who are doing it, so that's the subject. We. Sent is the verb. Okay, that's the action. So what receives the action? In other words, the direct object, a probe, right? The probe is what we sent. So that is your direct object. Then the sun, to the sun, is the indirect object. That is what receives the probe. So those are the dative and accusative cases. Right? Dative represents the indirect object, the thing that receives the direct object, and the accusative is the direct object which receives the action of the verb. All right, yeah, go over those again. If there was anything that you didn't understand, if you go through this and you still don't understand this, please contact me and I'll see what I can do to explain it a little bit better. These are things that you don't really think about when we're, speaking English, or if you have any other language that was a first language. You don't think about this because it's just kind of assumed. You just know how this works. Okay, it's subject, verb, object, indirect object. And if it's an indirect object, you put the word to. If it's genitive, you put the word of. Okay, we use all of these ideas in English, but they're very much kind of in the background in English. And yeah, once you learn a language and you know how to speak it and communicate, yeah, you just do this. Your brain just does it. Your brain kind of fills in all these things. When you're learning a new language, that's when you have to learn all these rules. So I left off one case, right? We went over 4 cases: nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative. There's one more, the vocative case. This one is used only rarely in the New Testament, so we're not really going to learn it. I don't think I'm ever going to require you to learn the vocative case form when we're memorizing noun forms. The vocative case, it only shows up when somebody is directly addressing somebody else, and then that person's name or title or group would appear in the vocative case. It indicates this is the thing that is being directly spoken to or directly addressed. When Paul is writing in some of his letters, he writes, for example, in Greek, it just says brothers. Most good modern English translations will translate that something like brothers and sisters, or beloved, or church members, or something like that. Okay, it probably was not intended to be gender specific, just men. But that word brothers, when Paul uses this to address the people that he is writing to, it appears in the vocative case. Brothers, let us, let us not tear down one another, but encourage one another. Okay, brothers and sisters, let us, so that would be in the vocative. If I'm speaking to you as a group, okay, students, make sure you're studying. Okay, the students would be in the vocative case because I'm speaking directly to you. My example, I don't know if this appears in any poetry or whatever. Oh, sun, how we marvel at thee. Okay, you're speaking directly to the sun, so therefore that's vocative case. Now, when translating in Greek, you cannot rely on the word order to suggest the English meaning. Sometimes, actually a lot of times, the textbook, when you go through the translation exercises, these first few, the textbook tries to kind of give you a standard word order so you can get used to it. But when you're translating Greek, do not rely on the word order for the meaning. Okay, if you do that, you're going to be wrong most of the time. It is not the word order, but rather it is the case forms that will tell you what a word is doing in the sentence. Here is an example. Okay, I've given you an example sentence: apostolos legusi lagus anthropoi. Okay, that is a complete sentence. In Greek, it is using a number of these cases. Okay, I think 3 out of the 4 are represented here. And I've put them here. I've kind of spelled out for you what the forms are. Okay, I know we haven't gone through the forms yet, and so you'll just have to take my word for this right now. But the first word, apostolos, okay, that is a dative case form. And you know it because you look at it, and once you learn the forms, you will know that is a dative case form. Therefore, it is functioning as the indirect object. Okay, as in the previous slide here. Okay, you notice there dative represents the indirect object, and so here apostolos is dative. Therefore, it is the indirect object. We're going to be translating to somehow. Okay, 2 apostles. The next word is your verb. You should recognize this from the previous chapter, at least the ending. I think the actual vocab term is going to be in this chapter. You'll learn it when you do the vocab for this chapter. All right, it comes from the verb lego, and if you remember your forms from the last chapter, you'll know that this is a third person plural. And it does not undergo any kind of change on the stem, therefore it is a present tense verb. Okay, present tense, third person, plural. They say or they speak. Next word is lagus. And when you learn the forms, this will be an accusative form, therefore you know that is the direct object. And the last word there is anthropoi, meaning human being or person. And this one is in the nominative case. There's your subject. And I notice, yeah, in English, subject always has to come before the verb, but here in Greek, you can jumble these all over the place, and it doesn't affect the meaning at all because you know once you know those case forms, you know what role it plays. Okay, therefore, anthropoi is the subject. Okay, human beings, and it's plural. Then what are the human beings doing? They're speaking. So human beings speak. Logos is your accusative form. Therefore, that is your direct object. That is what the human beings are speaking. They speak words. And then the final thing that you have to translate is the first word in the sentence, apostolos. That is dative. Therefore, it's the indirect object. It's who receives the words. All right, and of course, yeah, here, apostles receive the word. So human beings speak words to apostles. Now, for this reason, it is very important and very obvious that it's important to memorize these case forms. Right? If you don't know what case it is, you have no idea what this is doing in the sentence. And if you try to go straight from English, and say, okay, yeah, there's the subject right there, apostolos. That has to be subject because it's before legusi, which is the verb. Yeah, you just got the entire sentence wrong. All right. Now, most nouns, that at least that we'll be learning the first part of this year, the case forms differ only in the endings. They're like the verbs. You take these standard endings, you take the ending off, you get the stem, and then you put these standard case endings onto the stem, and that's how you know what case it is in. Okay, the noun stem doesn't change, and when you're changing cases, you just add a different kind of ending that comes in a pattern, and that's how you know what case it is. One last thing, in addition to case, nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and number, singular or plural, that's what we refer to when we say number, just like the verbs. Okay, are we talking about one or are we talking about more than one? Greek also has grammatical gender. All right, so case, number, and gender are always going to be three important parts of nouns. Grammatical gender doesn't refer to actual natural gender. All right, but every noun has it. Every noun has a gender, and some of them, they make good sense. Okay, and the words that you would think about that demand being, masculine and feminine, if we're thinking about, in the gender binary, and I know that, yeah, we're moving off of that, and yes, we affirm that people, can be gender fluid and non-gendered even, okay, but yeah, you have transgender people who are, not identifying as their biological gender, okay, but yeah, Greek, where we have three choices. You got masculine, feminine, and neuter. Those are choices for gender. And there are some words that, yeah, they fall into these categories, and it's obvious which one, we're talking about. In Greek, man is masculine, thankfully. Woman is feminine. And the gospel is neuter. Right? All of those make good sense. Right? They kind of fall into what you would expect as the natural gender. But like other languages, okay, I know Spanish has gender, I know German has gender, okay, in Greek, yeah, same way, okay, sometimes you have these words and it seems like they've just gotten assigned to a gender, and it's hard to comprehend why certain words are certain genders. All right, death is masculine, sin is feminine, and child is neuter. Each of those categories and words is somewhat confusing. Okay, what about death is masculine? Well, I don't know. Okay, what about sin is feminine? I don't know. You could think of like what, men get into more fist fights, I think. Men typically have been fighting in wars, so I get, yeah, sure, death is masculine. Sin, if you think about the Bible story, right, the first sin was, the first sin among humans anyway, was Eve being tempted and then eating the fruit in the garden. So, okay, maybe that makes sense, some kind of sense. Sin is feminine, and child is neuter. That one doesn't really make any sense at all. Okay, but yeah, gender, I've noted here, little to no effect on meaning, but it does have some determination on what form these are. Okay, and what kind of pattern they take. So yeah, every Greek noun has case, nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, number, singular, plural, and gender, masculine, feminine, or neuter. And those gender categories will not always make sense. All right, enough talking about the background of these. Now let's get into the actual patterns of the second declension. Now, why are we doing the second declension when this is the first introduction that you've had to nouns? Well, the second declension is always studied first. I've never seen a textbook that does the opposite, okay, that actually does the first declension first. It's because the second declension is much easier, and it's a nice kind of introduction to this weird new way of thinking about nouns. We're going to look at a chart in the very next slide, and that will show you these form changes. Okay, and once you see that and memorize it, you'll be able to recognize what case a noun is in, and also whether it's singular or plural. Gender, it's a little bit harder. Gender it's not nearly as reliable as those other two, but certainly case and number, you will definitely know that once you know this pattern. I put here, yeah, we're just not going to work with the vocative case. I'm not going to have you memorize it. It just doesn't appear very often, and usually a vocative looks very similar or identical to a nominative. In the second declension, these words that we are studying here, the masculine and feminine forms look exactly the same. There's no way to tell whether a word is masculine or feminine just by looking at the word itself. Okay, they look the same. For the neuters, there's going to be something a little bit different, and we'll go over those. So let's have a look at the actual second declension pattern. This is the declension pattern of the second declension word logos. Now, most of the time, these words will fit into only one declension pattern. Okay, a word will be second declension, and it won't be first or third. There are very small number of words that will actually change between them, but for the most part, a word only fits into one of these categories. Okay, so if I say logos is a second declension pattern word, it's not going to have first declension forms. So let's look at the second declension. Okay, what does this mean? Second declension is what you're looking at right now. It's this pattern here of nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, singular, and plural. So let's go down the line, treating the singular forms first. Notice you have here the word logos. This is the word that means word. And the standard sort of dictionary form of a noun that you're going to look up either in your textbook vocabulary or if you get a nice big Greek lexicon, that dictionary form that you look up is always going to be based off of the nominative singular form. So in this case, you would look up nominative singular is logos. Now here I've highlighted in red the noun stem. Okay, and to find that, you're just going to drop off the nominative singular ending, omicron sigma, and you're left with your noun stem. Notice that does not change. Okay, I've highlighted in red, and that never changes. It's always lambda, omicron, gamma, log. What does change, and what gives you the case and number information, are the endings. Okay, just like the verbs, you have these standard endings that you plug onto a non-changing stem, and that is how you know whether a word is nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and whether it's singular or plural. All right. You can take these endings that are in red and put them onto any other second declension masculine or feminine word, and the information will be exactly the same. Okay, that ending omicron upsilon is always going to be genitive singular. The omega with an iota subscript is always going to be the dative. I'm not sure I covered subscripts in chapter 1 when we're talking about the forms of the letters. Certain long vowels, eta, alpha, and omicron, will occasionally get this weird little thing. Look at the dative singular there. That weird little tail on the bottom of the omega. All right, that is called an iota subscript. Maybe I'll put this back to the black letters so you can see it a little better. That little thing under the omega in the dative singular is an iota subscript. It's just the letter iota, but instead of putting it out next to the omega like you normally would, they put this underneath in a like tiny little lettering, okay, under certain of these long vowels, and those long vowels are going to be alpha, eta, or omega. They will not appear under any other vowels. Okay, why that is the case, I'm not sure. Why they chose to do it this way, I don't know. The other thing about this is that even though it is an iota, and it's the letter iota, you can think about this like the silent E at the end of many English letters. English words. Okay, we are not going to actually pronounce that. The dative singular of logos is not logoi. Okay, omega iota, logoi. It is just logo, because that iota subscript is silent. You don't pronounce it. Okay, it is there, and it's part of the spelling, and I will ask you to memorize wherever those iota subscripts are, because yeah, it's part of the spelling, and it will change the meaning of the word if you don't have it. Okay, so make sure you include that. If I ask you to write out a form chart of logos, make sure in the dative singular you get that little subscript. And that's something that's typical of all of these. Okay, second, first declension words, they pretty much always get an iota subscript someplace in that dative singular. The vowel that's with it might change, but you're always going to have the iota subscript there in the dative singular. All right, so yeah, again, you can take these endings, plug them onto any other noun stem, and you'll have the correct declension pattern. Okay, and you know what case it is and what the number is. So yeah, learn these second declension endings, learn them really well, and you'll be well on your way to translating. All right, so logos is a masculine second declension word, and so it takes those endings. If it was feminine, the endings would be exactly the same. Maybe I'll go back to that. Okay, logos happens to be masculine, but if it was a feminine word, yeah, still the same endings. Masculine and feminine look the same. Now here we're moving on to the neuters. And the neuter nouns, there's a few differences, but those differences are so subtle they still call this second declension. Okay, it's just a subset of the second declension with the neuters. You will not find any masculine or feminine words in this kind of category or following this pattern. These are only neuters, and you'll never find any neuters crossing over into where the masculine and feminine endings are. Okay, you see these endings on there, you know that they're neuters. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I should say if you see this pattern, you know it is a neuter. Some of the endings are actually the same as the masculine and feminine, and it gets kind of confusing. All right, so let's have a look at this then. Nominative singular, do-ron. Then the genitive singular, do-ru. Dative singular, do-ro. Again, there's that iota subscript, and you don't pronounce it. It's just do-ro. Accusative singular, do-ron. Moving over to the plural, now we're talking about gifts, plural, more than one. It could be two or it could be 200 million. All right, but yeah, just more than one is plural. So your nominative plural is do-ra with an alpha on the end, then do-ron, genitive plural. Do-rois is the dative plural. and dora is the nominative, the accusative plural. Now, have a look at this chart, okay? And what are some things that you notice about this chart? Well, first of all, you will notice that the nominative and the accusative forms are the same. Okay, nominative singular and accusative singular are the same. The nominative plural and accusative plural are the same. This is a nice always, always, always rule, and you get very few of these in Greek, and we're going to get two of them right here. Okay. The first always rule is that if you have a neuter noun, the nominative and accusative forms are always going to be the same. Okay, there will be differences singular and plural, but within the singular, nominative and accusative are always the same, and then within the plural, the nominative and accusative are always the same, no matter what. Okay, we'll learn a few more declension patterns. If the word is neuter, the nominative and accusative forms are always the same. All right, and there are precious few of those always rules, but there's one of them. Okay, so if you notice, both the nominative and accusative in the singular have that omicron nu ending, and then in the plural, you've got that alpha ending for both the nominative and accusative. This is nice for learning these charts, right? Because you don't have to memorize as many forms. You've already got pretty much half the chart filled out for you there if you know that rule. But it can be a problem when you're translating. Okay, you come up to the form dora, and you don't know if this is going to be the gifts are doing something as a subject, nominative, or if the gifts are receiving the action, accusative. Okay, and you have to kind of try both of them. Most of the sentences is going to be obvious, okay, but some of them, you're going to have to try both of them. Try gifts as a subject and gifts as the object. The other thing that makes it not so bad to memorize this neuter chart is look at the two middle cases, okay, the genitive and the dative. If you remember back to the masculine and feminine forms, those endings there, the genitive and the dative in both the singular and the plural, are identical to the masculine and feminine. Okay, let me go back here. Okay, yeah, notice this, the genitive and dative in the singular, lagu and lago, and in the plural, lagon and lagois. And if we go up here to your neuters, exactly the same endings, right? Do-ru and do-ro in the singular, do-ron and do-rois in the plural. So yeah, your nominative and accusative look like each other, and the genitive and dative look like the masculine and feminine forms. So yeah, you pretty much get the second declension endings down, okay, and yeah, it's really easy to go to the neuters. Okay, it's not really a new pattern. I said I gave you one always, always, always rule in Greek that you almost never get in the language. There's almost always these really annoying exceptions and things that you have to keep in mind. But that's one of them, okay? Nominative, accusative of neuters is always the same. Here's another one, okay? Look at the genitive plural form. And what is the, what's the ending for that genitive plural? Okay, it's omega nu, logon. Now if we switch to the neuter, notice it's the exact same ending, right? Omega nu. When we move to the first declension in chapter 5, you will see that the genitive plural is still omega nu. And when we get to the end of next quarter, second quarter, and we start studying third declension nouns, the genitive plural will always be omega nu. For some reason, that ending is very persistent and very sticky, okay? And that ending will never change. Anytime, okay, genitive plural, the ending will always, always, always be omega nu. I absolutely guarantee it. This rule does not go the other way, though, okay? Notice how I stated that. I said, if you have a genitive plural, the form will always be omega nu. The converse of that statement is not true, okay? You cannot say that if you have an omega nu ending on a word, that is always going to be a genitive plural, because that's false. There are other forms that take the ending omega nu. And we'll cover some of those, and I'll point that out when that happens. It's super annoying, yeah, and you know, you've been working with these for so long, and it's super easy to say, oh yeah, that's an omega nu. It has to be genitive plural. Now, it is true that everything that is genitive plural will always be omega nu. Okay, so in your quizzes, you know, when we get back to meeting in person, and you know, you're doing these quizzes on your own, and you know, you're trying to fill out one of these form charts. But just remember, anything that's noun, pronoun, adjective, whatever, anything that is genitive plural, the ending is always going to be that. So yeah, please get at least one of these right, even if you didn't study the night before or whatever. Yeah, you know that if you see a form chart like this, and it has a genitive plural form that it's asking for, ending is always going to be omega nu. Okay. All right, I've put something here that is practice, okay, identifying these important things for case, gender, and number. Think about those endings, okay? Go back to previous slides if you need to look at the case and number endings. But yeah, you look at these forms here, even if you don't know what the words mean, you just look at the endings and you know what case and number they are, certainly. Gender is a little bit more difficult because masculine and feminine look the same in the second declension. Okay, but have a look at these words. Angelois is the first one. And theou, hiera, hadoi, and teknon. Alright, do you remember what the endings are for all of these? Okay, angelois, theou, hiera, hadoi, and teknon. Now on some of these it could be there could be some ambiguity here. Alright, but yeah, let's see how you did. Okay, if you need, yeah, again, if you need to go back and look at those, refresh your memory on what the endings are. But really, yeah, all you're looking at is the ending. Okay, so in the first one, angelois, if you're just identifying case and number, just look at the ending, omicron, iota, sigma. And which one is that in the chart? Okay, well, here you go. Okay, angelois, it happens to be a masculine word. And if you remember from the form chart, ois, the ending, is dative plural. Okay, omicron, iota, sigma is dative plural. Second one, theou, omicron, upsilon is your ending. This word happens to be masculine, and the ending is genitive singular. Third word, hiera. Hiera is a neuter form. Because it is neuter, the nominative and accusative forms are going to be the same. So I've put both of them on there. And then, yeah, the alpha ending there means it's neuter plural. Fourth word is pronounced hadas. If you look closely, you can see that it has a rough breathing mark over the omicron. So you pronounce an H sound before that, hadas. Hadas is an uncommon word. It is a second declension word, but it's feminine. And so it's going to look exactly like the masculine words, okay, but you just kind of have to remember that it's feminine, one of the few second declension feminines. But the ending is no problem. Okay, even if the gender, it's a little bit different. The case and number, you should be able to get this one. Omicron sigma, this is a dictionary form. It's a nominative singular form. Okay, hadas. Last one here is teknon. The gender on this one is neuter. And as I mentioned before, yeah, you have an omega nu ending here, and so that strongly suggests that it is a genitive plural. Alright, so that is how you identify gender, case, and number in a second declension noun. Okay, gender, not so reliable, and I either wouldn't ask you what the gender was on a quiz, or I would give that information to you. All right, because yeah, just taking a look at the words, there's no way to tell whether a word is masculine or feminine. All right, if you got any of the case and number wrong for any of those, go back to the chart, the form chart, and yeah, do a little bit more memorization. Should be able to, after a couple of practice runs at this, you should be able to start getting these pretty much automatically. Okay, know those form charts backwards and forwards, because it will save you a lot of time and headache when you're translating. Okay, now, so if you go back and you learn those forms really well, and you know what, you know how to identify the cases and numbers, well, you're ready to translate Greek sentences now. Okay, because you know what form is doing what, okay, and we can decipher the case and the number, so we know who and who's doing something or who's receiving action. Have a look at these three sentences. All right. First one, sozousin apostoloi adelphous. Sozousin apostoloi adelphous. Second sentence, ou graphete lagus huiois. Ou graphete lagus huiois. The oo there, what does that oo mean? If you remember from chapter 3. And then the last sentence there, luusin huioi doulos apostolon. Luusin huioi doulos apostolon. All right, for the first one there, sozousin apostoloi adelphous. Notice that the first word there is a verb. That is the third person plural form of the verb, sozousin. Then the next word, apostoloi, the ending is nominative plural. Therefore, that's going to be your subject. Then adelphous, omicron, upsilon, sigma, the ending is accusative plural. Okay. Well, let's just get the information up there. Okay. Second sentence, ou is not. If you remember from the last chapter, then graphete. It is the second person plural form of the verb write. And lagus. Again, notice this is the same ending as adelphous from the previous sentence. Therefore, this is going to be the accusative form, accusative plural. And the last word there, huiois. Omicron iota sigma. This is now the dative form. Dative plural. Last sentence. Luusin huioi doulos apostolon. Okay, luusin has the same ending as sozousin in the first sentence. Okay, so that is also third person plural. And huioi. Notice this has the same ending as apostoloi. So that is your nominative. Doulos has the same ending as adelphous. So that's the accusative, plural, and apostolon. Here is that nice, familiar omega nu ending, which suggests a genitive plural. All right, if you got all of those, congratulations. Yeah, you're doing really well. Let's go ahead and put those forms all up there. Okay. You can have a look at that and see how you're doing with those endings, specifically the noun endings. And here are the translations. All right, first sentence. Apostles is your subject. So apostles are doing the saving. Brother is in the accusative, and it's plural, so brothers, and that's your object. Okay, that's what's receiving the saving. Apostles save brothers. Next sentence. You, plural, do not write words to sons. This one, you have to get the subject out of the verb. It is not stated there. Notice there's no word for Greek that says you plural in this entire sentence. Okay, the subject is entirely missing, but you know what the subject is because of graphete. Okay, the ending of graphete is second person plural, therefore you can put you plural there as the subject if there is no subject that is stated. You plural do not write words to sons. What else? Yeah, sons. Notice that last word, huiois. Son is plural. It is also dative, so when you go to translate it into English, put a to in front of it. Okay, it's not you plural do not write words sons. It's words to sons, indicating the indirect object. And the last one there, luusin huioi doulos apostolon. Sons loose slaves of apostles. Okay, sons is nominative plural, therefore that's your subject. That's who's doing the loosing. Doulos, again, there's your familiar now ending, like lagus and adelphus from the previous sentences. Doulos is accusative plural of slave or servant. So sons loose slaves. Now, which slaves are we talking about? Apostolon genitive. Okay, and the genitive gives you possession, so you translate of, slaves of apostles. All right, we don't know if any apostles kept slaves. I hope they didn't. Okay, but yeah, anyway, that was one of the sentences. So now, a few things to keep in mind when you're doing translating, as we're moving to translating these nouns now. Something that's really annoying, and I don't know why this is, but if you have a neuter plural subject, all right, I mentioned before the word child is neuter, okay, and so here you have age tekna apostolus. Notice tekna is a neuter plural, and it can be nominative or accusative. All right. In this case, this sentence sounds like it is probably a nominative. You have another word there that is definitely accusative. Apostolus can only be accusative. It cannot be nominative. Okay, so this is probably going to be your subject. But notice the verb now, age. If you remember back from chapter 3, all the way back from last week, yeah, the ending there is a third person singular, not a third person plural. But it's singular because tekna is neuter, and a neuter plural nominative takes a singular verb. I've heard it said that it's probably because Greeks thought of neuter words as they're not personal, and so therefore, like, a plural of them is almost like a collective. You think of it as like a collective gathering, and so therefore they put it as a singular. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but it is a definite rule. That is something that will happen. Now, I've put here, the book gives you a couple more ways to translate the genitive and dative cases. Normally, the genitive case indicates possession, and you translate of before the noun. But the genitive case can also take on a function called ablative genitive. That's just a fancy term, and you won't have to learn that until next year if you stick around and take second year Greek. Okay, but the ablative genitive is no longer talking about possession, but it's indicating separation or source. Okay, where something is proceeding from. So instead of, you translate something like from or away from, okay, in front of the word. So here, ago Christon oiku. Ago is the word I lead. And Christon is the accusative singular of Christos, which is Christ. I lead Christ, oiku. Okay, you you don't normally think of this as, yeah, like, I lead a house's Christ. Okay, or I lead Christ of a house. Okay, Christ belonging to a house is kind of a strange idea. Okay, much more likely, I lead Christ from a house. Okay, away from a house. Either one of those is a way to translate the ablative genitive. It's pretty infrequent that you're going to have an ablative genitive. The possession genitive is much more common. And so if you're translating a line, you see a genitive, most of the time translate of. But if it really doesn't work, and it just doesn't make sense to put of, something is definitely not possessing. You know, whatever is in the genitive is definitely not possessing or owning this thing. Okay, then you can try like an ablative form, from or away from. So yeah, the genitive case has that one extra meaning. The dative case has two extras. But again, these are not super common. Okay, normally the dative indicates an indirect object and you translate to. But it can also indicate things called location. Okay, there's something called the locative dative or the instrumental dative. And instrumental just means it's telling you the thing that someone or something is using to accomplish something. Okay, the means by which something is done. The first example there is the locative dative, the location dative. I see an apostle, blepo apostolon agro. And the underline kind of obliterated the iota subscript there, but it is there. Okay, and so that is a dative singular form. And so you can say, I see an apostle to a field. Well, actually, you can't say that. What on earth does that mean? Okay, I see an apostle to a field. So if you run up against a situation like that, and it really doesn't sound right, and it sounds like a really awkward translation, then try this. Okay, try some of these. The locative location dative is translated in, or among, or at. You can try all of those. Okay, here the word in seems to be the best. You could say at, really, but really we don't say at a field, more in a field. Okay, I see an apostle in a field. The instrumental dative, you translate this with or by. So here, therapue doulon lago. Therapue, he heals. Doulon is accusative, therefore that's what's getting the healing. He heals a servant. Lago. Notice here you can't can't translate to. Okay, it's not an indirect object. You don't say he heals a servant to a word. Now the word is the thing that he is using to heal the servant. Okay, Jesus can heal with just a word, and so therefore he heals a servant with a word, or by a word would probably work too. Okay, but yeah, with certainly sounds the best. All right, so have a look at those. Okay, I think my sort of experience teaching this class, you are going to use these very, very infrequently, or you're going to read them very infrequently in first year. They will appear a little bit more often in second year, and we'll talk more about them in the second year. Okay, there's actually lots more ways you can translate a genitive, and yeah, we'll go through all of those and how you know which one to use. Okay, similar to the dative. These are extra uses, but they're not the only ones. But for the scope of this class, that's probably even more than you need to know. Everything that I've seen is able to be translated with like a possessive genitive. I can't remember any time, even though that's no guarantee that it never will happen. Okay, but I don't really I don't remember off the top of my head ever needing to use those extra ones. The next thing that we're going to talk about is what we call an indefinite article. In English, it's the word a or an. A rock, an apple, a human being, a professor, a a building. Okay, any of those things. It's the indefinite article. It's not pointing to a specific thing in that category. It's not pointing to the Empire State Building. It's pointing to a building. Indefinite, kind of a general idea. Okay. In Greek, there is no equivalent of this. There is no indefinite article. That's not to say it's not there. Okay, the Greeks, I think the Greeks did understand when somebody intended to put an indefinite article in, or to suggest that something is kind of this indefinite general idea. They just don't have a word for it. Okay, but there are other ways of telling when that is appropriate to put in there and when it's not. For the scope of this class, though, just try and translate the words, and if it's obvious that something needs one of these little indefinite articles to make the sentence sound good, go ahead and put that in there. Okay, it'll never be in the Greek, because Greek doesn't have one of these. But at certain times, and those certain times are fairly common actually, you will have to put one of these into the English translation, even though it does not appear in the Greek. I put an example here, diakonos lege adelpho. Okay, diakonos is the word for deacon, or it's a word that we get the word deacon from, okay, in English, diakonos. Diakonos means a minister, a server. Lege, again, that's a third person singular of to speak or to say. And then adelpho. Adelpho, that iota subscript there is a dead giveaway that you're dealing with a dative singular word here. Okay. And adelpho comes from the word adelphos, which means brother. Translation of this then, a minister, diakonos, speaks to a brother, adelpho. Notice what happens when we leave those out. It sounds a whole lot worse if you say, minister speaks to brother. Yeah, it sounds like, I'm trying to do a kind of like a Tarzan speak or something here, right? Minister speaks to brother. Yeah, a minister speaks to a brother. Now, there is a Greek definite article. Okay, and we'll study it in chapter 5. You'll also have I also put a note on the vocab list to tell you how you recognize a definite article and what that means. All right, again, we're going to learn this in the next chapter, and so right now you do not have this in your toolbox, but you can still use it actually, even if you don't know what the forms are. When you're translating in the sentences, you can actually put this in there because the Greeks themselves were fairly loose and relaxed in its use. So sometimes even if we're missing that, you can actually stick it in there. Okay, even if it's not there in the Greek. And yes, there is a definite separate Greek form for the definite article the, but there are places where you just have to put it in there or it doesn't sound right. Okay, in John chapter 1 verse 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Those first words there are NRK. Literally, this means in beginning. Okay, John 1:1 starts out, in beginning was the Word. But again, that doesn't sound great, and it just sounds, you say that and it sounds like something is missing, right? And so you just have to put that in there. In the beginning was the Word, and you can do that, but most of the time, just especially in this class, just stick to when you see the definite article, put it in there. If you don't see it, either leave it out completely or put the indefinite article a or an. Another thing, complements. What is a complement? All verbs have a subject, and that subject is either stated with a nominative case word, or it is implied in the verb. Okay, luo means I loose. Okay, I, subject, and the verb loose. Okay, so yeah, you'll have all nouns, all verbs, they're going to have subjects. They're either going to be stated as a nominative case word, or they will be, yeah, tucked in there with the verbs. A word called transitive verbs. These are verbs that take a direct object. And so therefore, yeah, they're going to have a direct object. In Greek, that direct object appears in the accusative case most of the time. So yeah, most verbs are going to be subject, verb, object. Okay, that's how you translate it into English, subject, verb, object. But a few verbs, and these are all these kind of state of being verbs, they're not really action, ideas, but just kind of like being. Okay, somebody is there, somebody happens to be there. Okay, these do not take direct objects like standard verbs. All right, they are not going to have direct objects, and so whatever they are with or referring to is going to be actually in the nominative case rather than the accusative. Just remember, if it's one of these sort of equative verbs that's making a statement about something that is asserted to be true. I am a professor. Okay, I am a father. You are a student. All of these kinds of things. Okay, they are not action verbs, but they're just telling you about a state that something is in. When you have one of these verbs, it will take its subject in the nominative and the complement, that kind of description of it. When I say I am a human being, okay, the human being is your complement, and that will also appear in the nominative case. Be somewhat careful of these, but they're actually fairly easy to recognize because they come with that certain class of verbs that doesn't really have action in it. And so far, the only verb of that category that we have learned in this class is eimi. So, apostolos, esti, doulos. There's a form of eimi, right? Esti or estin. And notice both of these words, apostolos and doulos, they have that nominative singular ending. Right? And so, in this case, word order does somewhat come into play. Okay, in Greek, when you have this situation where you have a equative state of being verb, and then you have a subject and a complement, the subject is usually going to be the one that's listed first, usually. All right, so apostle is the subject, doulos is the complement, and they are both in the nominative case. Okay, an apostle is a servant. Here's another example. This one, you do not have the separate nominative, noun? Okay, nominative case noun. But, so you're going to have to get your subject from out of the verb. Okay, and the verb is eimi, which means I am. Uk is not. And God, theos is God, and notice that is also nominative because it is the complement. Okay. So, I am not God. All right. Next one you have is conjunctions. Conjunctions, this is pretty simple. I'll go through this fairly quickly. Okay, a conjunction is a small little word that joins together words, clauses, or sentences. English examples of conjunctions: and, but, or, rather, therefore. Okay, Peter and John. And joins those two names, Peter and John. But what shall we say for this? Okay, there's something that came before that, and that tells you this is being joined. And is kind of like an arrow that is proceeding forward. It's joining two things. But is more like a U-turn sign. All right, it's reversing kind of the thought pattern of a sentence. Okay, then you have other things, or. Rather, and therefore. And these are other conjunctions that are joining either just words or clauses, entire sentences, okay, entire ideas. The nice thing about these is that these are not declinable. You do not have to learn 8 forms for each one of these words, like you do with the nouns. There is a class of conjunctions. I needed to make sure you knew about this. Okay, there's a class of conjunctions called postpositives. I'm not going to quiz you on the meaning of the word postpositive, but what it just means is that these words, if a word is a postpositive, it can never appear first in the Greek sentence. All right, de. The conjunction de in Greek, just delta epsilon, is a postpositive, and you will never see that at the beginning of a sentence. Yeah, you'll never see that at the beginning of a clause. But when you go to translate this into English, you typically do translate it first. Okay, so here's an example. Doulos blepses. Look at that blepses. Is there anything that you notice there that looks different? This is a future verb, and because of the p sigma combination, it changes to psi. All right, so this is a future verb. You, singular, will see slaves. All right, you, singular, will see slaves. But we will see brothers. Yeah, I just noticed I forgot to put that in the translation there, the future tense. And there we go. All right, that looks better. Now, blepses is, yeah, it's future. So, doulos blepses adelphus de blepsamen. You will see slaves, but we will see brothers. Okay. Notice that in the second clause there, the de is second, right? Because it's postpositive. You can't put it first, so there always has to be something before it. But then when you go into English, you translate that first in the clause. Yeah, just some weird thing that characterizes the differences between the two languages. A couple more notes on these conjunctions. Even though they do not decline, they don't really change form. The word Allah, which means but or rather, is shortened to al. The alpha is dropped out before a word or a diphthong, and you'll notice that apostrophe there that we talked about in chapter 1. And that apostrophe at the end of the word al shows you that something has been dropped out. Okay, for example, al akuo. Akuo begins with a vowel, so therefore you drop off the second alpha off of Allah. Lastly, there is a conjunction series that goes chi, and those 3 dots there mean something's been left out. So it's chi something, and then chi something else. Okay, you have 2 chis, and they're joining things in kind of a series. If you have this, chi, the first chi means both, and then the second chi means and. Typically the meaning of chi is and, or what else, like and, or even, or also. But if you have 2 of these in succession, the first one is both, whatever it follows it, both something and something else. Kai apostolois, kai angelois, kai apostolois, kai angelois legamen. Okay, we speak, legamen is first person plural, we speak. Then notice this is dative. Okay, both apostolois and angelois are dative. So 2. We speak to, and then you have kai, right? We speak to both apostles and angels. So that's what that kai means. You'll see that at the very bottom of your vocab list. And if you had any questions on what that meant, that's what it is. Okay, so both, and then stuff has been left out. Both something, whatever was left out, and then something else. Okay, that's kai kai. All right, one of the translation the translation assignment for this week is found on page 33 of the textbook. I don't know if you've been able to get a hold of those. I did include this in a handout that I sent out with the email. Okay, but the translation exercises, now your sentences are getting a little bit more complicated, and so I thought I'd give you kind of my way that I translate these. You can translate it any way you want, just as long as you get to an English, translation and it looks good and it makes sense. Then you're fine. You don't have to do it my way. But I have found for me that this is what works best. Okay? When you go to a translation exercise, a sentence, or an entire Bible passage, let's say, the first thing that you want to do is find the verb. Now, why is it that I say find the verb? Well, I'll wait on that for right now until we get to the second point. Okay, but you find the verb and you determine whether the verb is a present or a future tense. Those are the two tense choices that you have so far. And I hope you remember how to tell which is which. But that's the first thing you want to do. When you find the verb, determine the tense of it, whether it's present or future. And then you figure out the person and number. For right now, where we are at, if the verb is first or second person, either singular or plural, it doesn't matter. Just if it's first or second person, that means that the subject is contained in the verb. Okay, because we don't yet have separate words for I or you. So if it's a first person singular verb, it's going to be I. The subject is going to be I. Okay, if it's second person plural, the subject is going to be y'all. The second sort of step that I recommend is that you look for any of the nominatives. Now, why do I say to do this second? Okay, why don't I say you find the nominatives first, because those are the subject and that's what you're going to translate into English first. Well, the reason is because certain sentences, they're not going to have nominatives. As I mentioned up at the first point, okay, if the verb is first or second person, you're not going to have any nominatives. Subject is contained in the verb. All right, so if you're locked into nominative is the subject, I have to find a nominative, you might be looking for a really long time in some of these sentences. All right, that's why I say first thing is to find the verb. That way you kind of have an idea of what is going on. All right, so look for any nominative second. If you do find one or more than one, you can find a lot of them actually, but if you find a nominative, determine whether that is singular or plural. All right, and then the nominative, if there is a nominative stated, that is going to be the subject of the verb. Okay, if there are not any nominatives, if you don't find any nominatives in a sentence, then you have to get the subject out of the verb. And the last point I have there, if the verb is a me, then you may have a subject and a complement. Both of those are going to be nominatives. Go back to slide 21 if you need more of a description of complements. The last point here, the last step in translation, once you've determined what the subject and the verb are, then you just go figure out the case and number of the rest of the words. Okay, whatever words are left, and right now they're going to be very simple sentences, so it might only be like 2 or 3 more words. Okay, but once you get subject and verb, go through all the rest of them then and determine case and number. Okay. Nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, singular, and plural. And again, I've included a refresher here on what those cases do. If you have an accusative case, that is the direct object. A genitive case indicates possession. And if you identify a dative case word, that is the indirect object. Okay, so those are some steps that I recommend you take when you're translating. But again, figure out something that works for yourself, and I'm not going to hold you to my method. So now let's look at some of these. Okay, let's look at some of these translation exercises, and you know, if we were in class, I would normally be able to go over these with you. I'd have the whiteboard, and I'd just write these out on the whiteboard and say, let's look at how to translate these. Well, we don't have a whiteboard, but I'll try and do it with these slides. Okay, the first sentence, and this is actually the first sentence of your translation assignment. So you know, follow along on this, or watch this later. But I will show you how to do this, and these will be, the first couple of them are going to be the examples, and then you can go on and you know, do the rest of them for yourself. I think it's numbers 1 through 11 is the assignment. So I'll run through a couple of these first. Okay, so here you have the sentence. If you want to read it out with me, the words are pronounced, first one, graphe. Graphe. Second word is doulos. Doulos, and then naman. Naman is the last word. Graphe, of course, comes from I write. Doulos is a slave or a servant, and naman comes from namas, which is the law. Okay, but first thing to do when you come to a translation exercise like this, I have suggested that the first thing that you do is find the verb. If you want to underline it, if you want to highlight it, somehow show that you have found what the verb is. Now, what is the tense, person, and number of that verb? All right. I do not see a sigma on the end of the stem. There's no amalgamation change there, not to gropse. All right. So the tense is going to be present. Then looking at the ending, the epsilon iota ending from last week's chapter, okay, that is a third person singular. Okay, so we have present tense, third person singular for this word graphe. All right, present third person singular. Third person singular as a subject, he, she, or it. Graphe means I write, and it's third person singular, so he, she, or it writes. Second step that I said, after you find the verbs, after you find all of the verbs, we now have all of the verbs here, so let's go and find the nominatives. Let's see if we can piece out a subject for that verb. Okay, doulos, if you look at your form chart, doulos fits the bill. Omicron sigma is the nominative singular ending. So there's your nominative, and now let's determine, is it singular or plural? We know that the case is nominative, okay, and so now we just have to determine, is it singular or plural? Well, the form is singular. Nominative singular, doulos. And that, the meaning of that is a slave or a servant. All right, now find the case, number, and meaning of the other words. There's only one other word in this sentence. Like I said, these sentences are pretty simple. So this leftover word, let's do this one. Okay, case and number of naman. There are a few options, actually, depending on whether this is neuter or if it's masculine and feminine. Namas is a masculine word, I believe. Namas. It means law. Okay. And because it is masculine, then we know that it's accusative singular. If you'll notice the ending, the neuter singular, nominative, and accusative has the same ending. So if you're stuck with this word and you don't know what it comes from, then it could be, it could be nominative, neuter, or accusative singular, or it could be masculine, feminine, accusative singular. Okay. In this case, it is masculine, so it's definitely accusative singular, and namas means law. So now here's all of the information that you know on these words, and that I've been able to piece out. So now just put your sentence together and make a nice, smooth translation. Okay. Use the nominative as your subject, therefore a slave. A slave, what is a slave doing? That's a verb. Okay, so a slave writes You can just replace the he, she, or it in the verb with a slave because you know now that you have the nominative there. And then the accusative is the direct object. That is what the slave is writing. A slave writes a law. The second sentence is number 2 on your assignment list, genoskete thanaton. Genoskete thanaton. First step, of course, find the verb. And what is the tense, person, and number of that one? Okay, genosko is a word that you will learn in this chapter's vocab. Okay, but the ending you already know. And it doesn't look like there is a sigma at the end of the stem. If there were, that kappa would be turned into a xi. All right, so this is a present tense verb, no stem change, no sigma, so it's present tense. And then the ending is second person plural, ete. All right, so I recorded that information on there. Next thing, find the nominatives. All right, well, we already know that the verb is a second person plural, so there are not going to be any nominatives. Okay, you have to get the subject in this sentence out of the verb, which is, again, why I told you don't find the nominatives first. Okay, because, yeah, I mean, this sentence is super short. You don't have to be looking around for anything. But, yeah, if you were fixated on, I have to find the nominative because that's the subject, you're going to be looking for a very long time for a nominative in this sentence because there isn't one. So, because there isn't a nominative, you have to get your subject out of the verb. Okay, it is second person plural, so therefore the subject of this verb is you plural, or y'all. And then if you look at the vocab list of this chapter, you will learn that ginosko means I know. I know, and so therefore the second person plural form of that is you plural know. So we got the verb, we've got no nominatives. Now just find the case number and meaning of all the other words, of which there is only one. And thanaton, again, is accusative singular. That ending is accusative singular. It could be neuter if it was neuter, but this is a masculine word, so it is accusative singular, and it means death. We have all of the information that we need on the page to translate this. Therefore, now translation, you plural or y'all know death. Kind of an ominous pronouncement there. All right, so I hope that's been helpful. At least you have you've got the first 2 translation exercises done. You can go through now and do the remaining few. I think again it was 1 to 11 was the assignment. Okay. This last slide is just a reiteration of the assignments that we will be doing this week, and I'm going to be asking you to hand in. Learn the functions of the 5 cases. Know those for sure. Okay. Nominative, subject, genitive, possession, dative, indirect object, accusative, direct object, and then the vocative, the one that we're not really going to be using very much, is direct address. I'm going to also ask you to memorize that second declension pattern for both the masculine, feminine nouns and the neuter nouns. Again, masculine, feminine, there's no difference in the form. Neuter nouns, there's that slight difference. Okay, a couple of slight differences, but it shouldn't be too bad. I've indicated both the slide number of this presentation and the page number of the textbook whenever you're able to pick up the textbook. All right, those are things to study and learn. As far as actual work to turn in, learn the vocabulary. Certainly on pages 31 and 32, you will need that to do the translation assignments and the quizzes. Complete the quizzes 4-1 and 4-2. I've attached those on the email, and that's exactly how they are named. Okay, quiz 4-1 and quiz 4-2. Quiz 4.1 deals with the declension forms and asks you to memorize those, and then 4.2 is vocabulary from this chapter. And then I've also said complete the translation exercises numbers 1 through 11 on page 33 of the textbook. And I will also send you a copy of this digitally, the translations. If you want to do them exactly like you did the other ones from the other week, you can. I didn't have any problem receiving those or opening them. So yeah, just as far as the assignments and quizzes, just keep on doing exactly what you did before to get them back to me, and that will be fine. Okay, and again, yeah, these are all of that stuff. The 2 quizzes, 4-1 and 4-2, as well as the translation exercises. You've got more than a week to turn those in. Okay, they'll be due on Wednesday, October 14th. Okay. All right. Yeah, lots to think about here. A lot of examples of how Greek is difficult, and Greek is very different from English. Okay, but once you start translating, once you start getting this stuff, Greek is actually kind of a nice language because it is so precise. Okay, and I mean, you have these 8 forms for each noun, and it's a bother to have to learn those. But once you do learn them, yeah, the language is very precise, and it just kind of flows together. If you've done all of that piecing stuff apart and writing out present, second person plural, accusative singular, getting all of that stuff, then it's just a matter of plugging in things where you already know where they belong. Okay, so Greek is kind of nice about that. Hebrew is totally different, so if either of you are moving on to Hebrew, either taking it this year, I know some people have tried to take both in a single year, and more power to you if you can. But yeah, Hebrew is totally different than Greek. And so, if you're finding this is really hard, take heart, because Hebrew will be totally different and you might just really like it. When I was going to school and studying Greek, there was one student who just could not get Greek. And he tried to take it a few times and he didn't like his grade, and he tried to take it again and, just wasn't really getting it. Went on to Hebrew and did really, really well, and said, where has this language been all of my life? Okay. The opposite is sometimes true as well. If you really take to Greek and you do well in Greek, Hebrew can be a little bit harder just because it's a bit more imprecise. It's not nearly as precise as Greek with all of the different forms. Okay, and it's like, one word can mean 7 different things. But yeah, that is something to worry about later. For the purpose of this, yeah, just memorize those forms. Keep up with the chapter 3 forms as well. You might want to go back and review those because, yeah, they're going to be coming up a lot. Okay, yeah, verbs are important in sentences. Every sentence has to have a verb, and so make sure that you know the verb forms as well as getting that vocabulary practice too. So, so these things are starting to click in, and you don't have to think about it or go back and look at it in chapter 3. If we're over in chapter 16 or 17, you don't want to be going back to chapter 3 to look up verb meanings or something. As usual, feel free to contact me with any questions that you might have, and yeah, keep up the good work. Looks like it seems to me like you're doing well, and yeah, I'm always here and ready to answer questions if you have any problems. If there are no questions, I hope everything in this has been clear. And again, yeah, just let me know if there's anything that I can clarify. But I hope you have a good week and a good rest of this day, whatever day you are choosing to complete this video lecture on. Okay, so yeah, I will see you again, and keep up the good work, keep going, and we are going to be continuing to stack things on, and pretty soon, yeah, you'll be translating entire Bible passages. Okay, just one step at a time, and just make sure that you're keeping on top of it and not getting behind. All right, I will see you later then, and take care. Have a great week. Okay, bye.